when I said this was an inch, it is an inch. It's an inch width, your bed, inch there, and your line that you've drawn is an inch. Now you can open that out marginally more than an inch if you want a fine piece of timber there. Some plane makers get this so fine it's almost like a feather edge. You can do that in boxwood, you can't do it in all timbers, but that's just preference. An inch will be alright. I've measured this particular plane and it is an inch, but sometimes I open it out a fraction more to get that little fine detail there. Then when you've done that, incidentally, when I come to these bits, after I've got the gauge cut or the file cut there, I do this with a chisel, or you can do it with a file. I do these two first, then work this chamfer in with a spoke shave or a file or whatever you want last, so that you get a nice, keep your eye on that nice mitre point there. Now you can, some English planes are finished like this, where the chamfer comes in and you just file or sandpaper a bit off those corners to nothing. I like that method, but you can actually just round it, which is easier. So the chamfers just round into that, whichever you prefer. Then it's the eyes. The last thing on the plane, I think. Make sure you leave at least 1/4 of an inch there. Don't take it too near to this point because it's a weak point. You get away with it in boxwood, but some timbers you wouldn't. So you put a line across there, right, and then with a round file or a half round file or whatever you want to use, you just take it to that point. It wants to be a nice point there if you can achieve it. It doesn't really matter if it doesn't go to a point, but it looks better if it does. And you just do that like freehand and sand it up. I usually put it in the vise and yeah, but you have to put it in the vise this way because you've rounded it. So you put it in the vise like that. I use the other vise on the bench, it's lower, and I just work that with a round, half round file, finishing off with sandpaper or whatever you want. Okay, and that's it done. Sarah's just reminded me you wanted a mark making in autumn. Now you always want to put your mark on when it's a solid piece of wood. Don't try and put your mark in after you've cut all this out. You can bust them, especially tiny planes. So when it's a solid block and you've set it out, you put your marks on. In this instance, I made this plane 30 years ago. At that time I called it Top Hat brand. I used to put a little top hat on, but that didn't last 5 minutes. Soon dropped that idea. And in this instance I've put, what have I put? Oh, English box. The bit of information you put on the front and back is very important to other people when you're selling planes. You know, it looks nice. So I tend to put all various things. Sometimes I have done script, you know, writing, telling them. Anyway, you put your mark on when it's a solid block and everything else. And in this instance, I've put London underneath. Plane maker to the gentry, because Alt Zaffel did that. It's a pun on what Alt Zaffel did. And a lot of people know I use that phrase. But just remember to do it in the block. And a tip I've already explained on my website or wherever, when you're marking extremely hard timber like boxwood, you can get a chattering of the mark. You want it somewhere solid on an anvil really when you're going to strike it, or really cramped up tight in the vise with a block underneath so there's no movement when you're going to strike it. And to stop it getting two marks, I advise people to put masking tape on first, perhaps 2 layers, and that stops this. When you hammer your mark with a heavy blow, it can chatter and you get ghosting another mark. Well, this prevents it. And then of course when you've marked it, you take that off, you'll have tape in there, but you can soon get that out. That's a tip I've learnt over the years.